It's time for us to start building enemies, and we're going to start with a simple one that bounces back and forth. A basic frog that will jump back and forth over the spike or wherever we want, and we'll make sure that it's customizable and reusable so we can have the frog bounce across anywhere, or maybe even change them out with a grasshopper or something else later on. So let's take our frog. I'm going to go to my Assets, Art, and Enemies folder, find the frog graphic, and I'm just going to drag it right out here into the scene kind of next to my spikes. I'm going to go click on it, just make sure that the pixels per unit matches 128 and 128, and then I'll zoom in and go select my frog. My frog's going to need a couple of different components. I'm going to want a collider on it for hitting things and landing on the ground and stuff, and I'm also going to want a rigid body for jumping, and then probably some sort of a frog script for jumping and handling that kind of bouncing around part. So first, let's add a collider. We're going to just start with a box collider 2D. Something relatively simple that we can fit over our character. We're going to shrink this thing down because it's probably too large. Let's go check our sprite renderer. Let's see, where's our box collider? Adjust the size down. We can see the white lines right there. I can actually see them with the sprite renderer on or off, so it didn't matter. I didn't need to turn it off. So I'll leave it on, and let's get a value of about 0.5 on the size of the box collider, and a value of about 0.25, but negative 0.25 on the Y offset there. I think that's pretty close. I think I want this to be a little bit taller, though. Let's go 5.5, or let's go maybe like a 0.6 and a 0.3. No, 0.2. There we go. 0.22. Sometimes it's a little bit of just messing around and not a lot of exact perfection. So I'm going to go with a 0.6 and a negative 0.22 for the offset and the size there. Now I've got my frog set up. I want to add a rigid body to him so he can bounce around and fall. We'll use the rigid body 2D, of course. I was already found there because I had BO on my search, and rigid body has a BO in it, so it kind of fit and matched. All right, let's save and press play. I should expect to see my frog just kind of sit there, not really do anything, but he's going to be a little bit far away, so I'm going to have to run over there and go visit my froggy. Say, hey, little frog, where you at? There we go. Look at that. My frog is there. He's ready to start jumping. So let's stop playing and go create a frog script that will allow our frog to jump back and forth. I'll go into my scripts folder. I'm going to right click, choose create, and choose C# script. We're going to name this frog because that's what he is. And then we're going to attach the frog script to the frog. Now, when I created the script, it automatically opened up my code editor. Sometimes that happens. I'll just minimize it. Go back over, select my frog. I'm going to rename him to Capital Frog because I want it to be nice and clean. Minimize our rigid body, drag the frog script over to the frog so it's on him, save my scene, and then open up the frog script by double clicking on it. There we go, we're in our frog script. So here we're going to need to write some code to do some jumping. We want our frog to jump and then turn around and jump again, and then jump and then turn around and jump again. And to do that, we're going to need to access the rigid body component and probably the sprite renderer component. So let's save those off right at the beginning. Let's start by deleting out our start and update methods. So let's at least delete out our start method. Let's leave the update method there. If you already deleted the update method, just hit Control Z. Let's delete out the start method, and we'll add an awake instead. So I'm going to say awake, and then let it autocomplete. Get rid of that private keyword. You can stop it from auto-generating that private keyword. I'm not going to dive into how to do that yet, though. So if you got your awake method here, we're going to need to save off our rigid body. And remember, we do that by going _RB, which is short for rigid body, just a little bit easier to type. It's one of the few that I actually abbreviate. In fact, it's probably the only one I abbreviate. Equals, and if I hit tab, it's going to autocomplete, but it's going to get me the wrong one. I want the rigid body 2D, so I need to add in that 2D. Then I hit the home key, Alt and Enter, and generate our rigid body field. Now we need to get the sprite renderer as well, so we'll say _sprite renderer. And you might be wondering, like, why don't you abbreviate that? And it's because generally I'm not lazy, but with rigid bodies, for some reason, I've stolen the habit of abbreviating them like everybody else does. So we generate the code to get component for our sprite renderer. I'll hit Alt-Enter and generate the field for the sprite renderer. Remember, we have to click on it first to get rid of these private keywords. Double-click, delete, delete. And now let's look at how we're going to jump, and let's look through a couple different options. There are a few different ways that we could do a timed jump. I've got a frog and I want him to jump every 3 seconds or every 5 seconds or some number of seconds. I could do that through the update method. Remember, in our update, we keep track of when the player's jump has to end, and we could do something similar to keep track of a timer for when the frog should jump again and put that into our update method. But there's another way to do something when we need to do something very simple like that on a specific timer, and I think that this is a perfect time to introduce that. So we're going to add in a new line here after our sprite renderer caching on 14, and this is going to be an invoke repeating call. We'll call INVOKE repeating. There are 2 versions of invoke. We want the repeating one. And here we need to give it the name of a method, the amount of time to wait for the first time that it calls it, and then how long to wait in between each time afterwards. We're going to give it the name of a method called jump, and we have to give this in quotation marks, so we'll put quotes, JUMP with a capital J. We're going to add a comma and put in our first parameter, which is the duration or the delay. And I'm going to use a variable here. I could put in a hard-coded value like maybe 3 and 3, but I want to make this variable, so I'm going to put underscore jump delay, and then we'll put another comma for our repeat rate. We'll use that jump delay again. We'll add a ending brace or ending parentheses and a semicolon, then we'll generate the jump delay field. So I'll hit Alt Enter, and we'll hit generate variable and generate a field. Don't generate a method. If you hit just Alt Enter and generated a method, you're going to get some bad invoke repeating method. Just hit undo. Make sure that you go generate variable and choose field. We've got our field here for our jump delay. I'll replace the private keyword with the serialized field attribute. Get that closing square brace, and I'm going to give it a default value of 3. So we've got a 3-second jump delay. Now this is going to try to call the jump method every 3 seconds, but we don't have a jump method. So let's delete our update method and add a jump method instead. I'll delete out line 19. I'm just going to hit Shift Delete and delete that whole line, and then replace the word update here with jump. There we go. I've already got the void, the parentheses, and the braces. Why recreate them? So now I've got my method here to do the jumping, and the jumping just needs to tell my rigid body to go flying off in some direction. And to do that, we add force, and we call r_rb dot add force. There we go. I typed it wrong, but autocomplete found it for me. And then open parentheses, and we need to give it a vector for our force. So we need to tell it how much force to give in what direction. So we're going to just call this force, and then we need to figure out what that force variable is. So our force is going to be some jump force that maybe we should expose to the inspector. Oh, why don't we do that? Let's, instead of calling this force, let's call it underscore jump force, and then hit Alt Enter and generate a field. We'll make that a serialized field by copying that attribute, pasting it over the private keyword, and saving. Let's go back over to Unity and see what this looks like. Here our frog script has reloaded. We've got our jump delay set to 3, and we've got jump force with a X and a Y value. The reason for that, of course, is that we're using a vector 2, and a vector 2 has an X and a Y value. That's what it is. It's a 2-positional vector. So we need to give it some force values for how far to jump, or how much force to add to the left or right, and how much force to add up or down. Right now it's just going to be up and to the right. So let's put in some values. I'm going to put in 300 for the Y and 200 for the X, hoping that that gives me a nice arc of more up than to the right. We'll press play, and I want to see this in the scene view because I feel like my frog is going to jump away long before I even get to see it. So I'll go back to my scene view. Let's take a peek. There he goes. My frog jumps, and he lands, and he jumps, and he lands, and he jumps. Oh, and he landed in the water. Look at that. He'll even jump through the water. So I think that that is pretty cool so far. I would like him to turn around, but I want to get this committed with my frog jumping first before I worry about flipping him around and making sure that he goes the right way and changes his sprite. So I'm going to save my scene and say that we started adding the frog to level 1 and check in our changes.